And we're back. Okay, so chapter 5 is the curious unconscious. So, Senior Sigmund Freud, who lived from 1856 to 1939, was the father of modern psychology, is credited with being the first to talk about the unconscious mind and its role in human behaviour. Paracelsus was notably the first to theorise about an unconscious mind that could cause disease. Freud introduced the idea that we bury conflicts and painful memories in the unconscious, like we bury a fantasy about lusting after our parents when we're about 3 years old, or maybe not. Our conscious mind is like the tip of an iceberg above sea level. The unconscious mind exists below sea level, and it's anyone's guess what's going on down there. Freud distinguished between the preconscious and the unconscious, since we can sometimes remember things that we have otherwise forgotten. Thus, he referred to those things we can remember as existing in the preconscious mind, which is likened to long-term memory. Whilst our unconscious can be seen as a dumping ground, the home of forgotten memories, Freud specifically reserved the unconscious for things we have repressed. We repress things because they're too awful for the conscious mind to bear. Repression is the unconscious forgetting of events, like with DID, it's a defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms protect us because they never let us experience an emotion we can't deal with. They keep threatening ideas out of consciousness. Thus, we might be in denial because the truth's too hard to face. We often rationalise situations by obfuscating the real reason for our actions because the real reason is unacceptable. Or we might project our undecidable qualities onto someone else. We call them out for who we are. With displacement, we transfer our emotions from the person who is the target of our frustration to someone else entirely, like we might kick the family pet or punch the wall. Or we might regress to childlike behaviour. There's also reaction formation, like we might be homophobic because we've got underlying homo tendencies. So we bury our unconscious thoughts, we stash them in the unconscious. However, despite our best effort at keeping these forbidden thoughts at bay, Freud highlights that whatever we suppress will nevertheless, on its own accord, try to become conscious. This explains why we Freudians slip up. Indeed, Freud constructed his concept of the unconscious from his analysis of parapraxis, like slips of the tongue. Moreover, whilst it seems like we accidentally slip up, Freud contended these slips were neither accidental nor innocent, but rather our unconscious is trying to communicate with us by revealing unconscious ken. Our psyche innately wants to be healed. It wants to be whole again. Thus, we need to address what we've hidden because it's making us unwell. Slips of the pen are like slips of the tongue. Like when absent-mindedly doodling, we might inadvertently write something. Automatic writing or psychography is produced without conscious awareness. It stems from the writer's unconscious, and it's a method for our unconscious to communicate with us. However, according to mediums and psychics, automatic writing is carried out by spirits. Mediums and psychics claim that the departed spirit guides the pen. People who conduct automatic writing describe their hand as being forcibly moved to write, stating their hand is gripped by a force. Like the renowned Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, who lived from 1888 to 1935, advised he would suddenly feel like he was owned by something else, or having a very curious sensation in the right arm which was lifted into the air without his will. He also emptied himself like a medium, allowing himself to be taken over by a series of personae, excuse me, under whose names he wrote very different types of poems with very different voices. Jane Roberts, an author and poet, also and well-known channeler, similarly advised that much of her work came from a spirit called Seth. Trance mediums notably go into a trance. They withdraw from the conscious state to allow a spirit to communicate. In his book, The Paranormal World of Paul McKenna, he mentions Rosemary, who had the gift of mediumship channeling. He wrote, Rosemary felt the familiar and dreadful sensation creeping over her, her face being tugged aside, pulled away from her. Her face went white, and she said she felt a powerful force take control of her body, paralysing her, pushing her down into the sofa as if beneath a crushing weight. It's on page 11. He states that Rosemary also seen apparitions regularly, so she had schizophrenia, it would seem, or not. Besides channeling alleged dead people, trance mediums also channel aliens who claim they're from other different star systems, and Hindu masters from Tibet and India, for example, channel spiritual entities like ascended masters to acquire ancient wisdom. Ascended masters are spiritually evolved, but we'll get back to these intriguing spirit beings because they're a piece of the puzzle. But not for Freud, who denied spirits, and we don't have spirit bodies that are out of action either. Freud claimed that mediums were merely mediums for their own unconscious, despite some mediums, when in a trance, revealing remarkable and inexplicable knowledge and abilities. Thus, if the medium spoke Aramaic, Freud would argue that they must have heard that language at some point. Perhaps Freud was in denial, because it seems unlikely. Freud likened automatic writing to hypnotize people saying and doing things when hypnotized, and sleepwalking and talking. It's like mysterious Ouija boards enable communicating with our unconscious, not spirits. Again, it seems Freud was in denial, because everyone knows crazy shit happens when people mess about with these infernal talking boards. Like furniture starts flying about the room and people get possessed. It's insane, and it makes people insane. Besides Freudian slips, other parapraxis notably include forgetfulness or thought blocking, which is a symptom of schizophrenia, misplacement of objects, and other thought errors that reveal unconscious wishes or attitudes. It seems something disturbs our consciousness, ergo we forget. It's like dissociation. In essence, Freud contended that the unconscious was the key to the mental lock. We needed to address what was going on deep down. The idea was to source the trauma. Freud posited the patient needs to consciously process such content, however painful, to get better. Thus, he developed depth psychology or psychoanalysis to delve deep into the patient's mind to elucidate the adverse traumatic experiences that had been suppressed for however long, which had caused their psychological disorders. Freud was also very interested in dreams and was a pioneer in the use of dreams to explore the unconscious mind. In his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, which was published in 1900, he explains how our unconscious mind tries to communicate with our conscious mind through our dreams. Rather than dreams being arbitrary psychological output, he said the interpretation of dreams is a royal road to the activities of the unconscious mind. Carl Jung, who lived from 1875 to 1960, was an early supporter of Freud because of their shared interest in the unconscious. And Jung was sex pest Freud's beloved pupil and potential heir until he wasn't. Jung dared to stretch the psyche's horizon. He also publicly criticised Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex, the fantasy about being our parents' lovers, and his emphasis on infantile sexuality, which did not go down well with Sigmund. So Jung agreed with Freud that in addition to our ego, the conscious part of our personality, which Jung called the persona, we have a personal unconscious, which Jung called the shadow. Thus, everything we hate and fear the most is repressed in the shadow. It's where we stash our unsavoury material. Jung conceded that most people project their shadow onto others, thus the endeavour is to deal with their shadow to bring it into the light of day. The emphasis is on integration, not repression. By liberating the shadow, we can become a whole psychological individual. Moreover, Jung theorised that beyond our personal unconscious, we inherit an impersonal, collective unconscious, so he took our unconscious to a new, deeper level. This ancient mind contains the entire psychic heritage of humankind. It's a kind of memory or type of library that stores all the images and ideas that have accumulated during eons of evolution. It's the foundational structure upon which the ego and personal unconscious are built. Jung highlights this shared memory, unconscious infrastructure, is reflected in all human customs and institutions. Universal myths and legends demonstrate our shared psychic database. Jung studied myths and religions, and he recognised the shared themes and symbols, so we're not so different after all. Jung was also very interested in dreams. He realised from a young age that his dreams contained content from beyond himself. Things came to him that were not from him. His dreams propelled his belief in the existence of the ancient mind. Jung's belief in the collective unconscious was confirmed when he studied illusions and hallucinations of schizophrenic patients. Their symbols and images resonated with universal myths and fairy tales. So the collective unconscious can be accessed through dreams and visions. A vision is a momentary eruption of unconscious material onto one's conscious processes. The collective unconscious was also the fountain that the mystics drank from. Jung theorised that we inherit instincts that predispose us to behave in certain ways. Like a cat is predisposed to have the nature of a cat, with instincts to roll on its back, climb trees, and eat small rodents and birds. We have the nature of humans. We have the same needs and instincts, like we need to be loved and valued. We need purpose and meaning. So Jung theorised that we inherit characteristics that determine the way we act to life's experiences, and he called these universal thoughts or dispositions to see the world in certain ways archetypes. Archetypes are thus instinctive patterns of behaviour which organise how we experience events, and they seek fulfilment in our personality. There's countless archetypes like father, mother, child, hero, warrior, explorer, trickster, leader, wise old man. man, it's asserted that there's as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. But the four main archetypes are the self, persona, shadow, and anima and animus. Anima is Greek for soul. It's apparently androgynous. We've got both a feminine and masculine nature. The self is the most important archetype because it's the archetype of wholeness, which is life's goal. The self is realized by integrating the unconscious mind with the conscious mind. These archetypes, which are like templates for behavior, are thus tucked up in the collective unconscious until they're triggered into being. The idea is that we inherit a blueprint for life which proceeds to implement itself through interaction with the environment. Archetypes are actualized in response to our inner and outer events in the human life cycle. It's like how genes switch on and off in response to changes in the environment. The program accounts for all stages of life, i.e. each stage is mediated through a new set of archetypal imperatives which seek fulfillment in both our personality and behaviour. However, before an archetype can penetrate the conscious ego, it must attract relevant experience to form a complex. For example, we've got a mother archetype, but it's not until we'll have the experience of a mother that will form a complex. Jung developed his concept of archetype through his theory on complexes. Complexes suggest a conflict or tension, something unresolved or issues around a certain theme. We've got a hang up about something. And he came to see complexes as rooted in archetypes. He deducted that at the core of any complex is a universal pattern or experience, or a universal pattern of experience or archetype. Jung developed his theory of complexes through his word association test. Thus, when reading out a list of 100 words with the subject saying the first thing that comes to mind, he recognised that certain words triggered something deep down. Emotions flared up. The emotional charge of a certain word had an immediate effect on the subject's level of arousal. The abnormal reaction, i.e. time delay or inappropriate nonsense association, indicated an unconscious psychological conflict. It's like with lie detectors. Resistance reveals areas of unconscious conflict. Scientology notably audits its members with this technology. Complexes tend to form as a result of internal conflicts, i.e. breach of boundaries. Jung said the origin of the complex is frequently a so-called trauma, an emotional shock or some such thing that splits off a bit of the psyche. As discussed, when part of our personality is not acceptable to our parents or society, i.e. anger, rebellion, sexuality, we disown it. Or when something is too overwhelming, i.e. painful or traumatic, our psyche's defences come to the rescue and splits it off from conscious awareness. The emotionally charged complex, relating to a particular archetype, is banished to the shadow. Jung observed that the dissociated complex protects the ego from being overwhelmed, but if it's triggered later on, like a particular word is said, it may overwhelm the ego and bring about dissociation. The person is tripped up by something they tried to shelve in the past. Thus, the endeavour is to bring the complex into the light of day. So whilst Freud posited that complexes are due to childhood trauma, which are repressed in the personal unconscious, Jung promulgated that the root of the complex resides in the collective unconscious. For Jung, complexes are the personifications or manifestations of archetypes from the collective unconscious. It's possible that complexes prove archetypes. And it's normal to have complexes, we all have them. It's normal for the psyche to dissociate and form complexes. They're the schematic building blocks of the psyche. They're the source of all emotions, influencing our attitudes and behaviours. Jung said, autonomous complexes are among the normal phenomena of life, and they make up the structure of the unconscious psyche. And like Freud, he agreed that these unconscious constructs want to be made conscious, hence their slip-ups and projections. For example, we might project our mother complex onto a therapist. Jung further explains that there are obvious interferences and disturbances that appear to come from nowhere, and these manifest in ways in which we can all identify with. For example, sudden confusion, a sudden change in mood, depression and anxiety states. Thoughts come to us, so-called intrusive thoughts, or equally thoughts vanish, thought blocking. An annoying tune pursues us all day as we have an overwhelming inability to concentrate. We may want to do something, but all of a sudden we can't be hooped, or we can't sleep or have nightmares. Jung postulates that autonomous complexes are responsible for creating these disturbances. He also noted that pathological symptoms can occur, like people get skin rashes or temperature shoots up. It seems autonomous complexes are like delinquent intruders because at any moment we can become possessed by them. Jung states that possession happens when so-called complexes take over the control of the total personality in the place of the ego, at least temporarily, to such a degree that the free will of the ego is suspended. Thus, we might feel like something has gotten into us. We might fly into a rage and act like a maniac. We might be temporarily insane. Jung advised that those who don't acknowledge their shadow are in danger of being possessed by it, and he observed the signposts to the complex are fear and resistance. Jung explains that complexes form autonomous splinter psyches within the overall personality. He wrote, "A complex with its given tensions or energy has a tendency to form a little personality of itself. It has a sort of body, a certain amount of its own physiology. It upsets the breathing, it disturbs the heart. In short, it behaves like a partial personality. For instance, when you want to say something or do something and a complex interferes with this intention, your best intention gets upset by the complexes, exactly as if you had been interfered with a human being or circumstances outside." But Jung extends this thinking by stating complexes have a life and a will of their own. He said, "Complexes behave like independent beings, a fact especially evident in abnormal states of mind. Complexes can be likened to archipelago islands. Exiled from consciousness or cut off from mainstream, the mainland, these psychic fragments or islands have an autonomous life of their own." So complexes or subpersonalities or splinter psyches have the potential to usurp our mind, which is especially evident in the mentally ill. They can dominate the personality, which results in psychopathology like neurosis, dissociative disorders, and some psychoses. Like the voices people hear can be the voices of their otherwise hidden complexes or subpersonalities. Jung explains that because the voice seems alien, it is perceived as external, which in turn gives rise to belief in spirits. So, like Freud, he was equally able to write off spirits, or not. Indeed, he said, "Possession, though old-fashioned, has by no means become obsolete, only the name has changed. Formerly they spoke of evil spirits, now we call them neurosis or unconscious complexes. And also, the demons have not really disappeared, but have merely taken on another form. They have become unconscious psychic forces, so we can sleep easy. Demons are created by our psyches, or not." As Jung stated, everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. It's conjectured that with extreme dissociation, like with dissociative identity disorder, splinter psyches become more autonomous, and this reveals our archetypal core. These can then develop into alternate personalities. Jung seems to envisage dissociation as a continuum extending from normal mental functioning to seriously abnormal states. Thus, while subpersonalities are merely personas or pieces of the whole and come entirely within the scope of normal, whereas DID is characterized by distinct personalities, Jung argued there is no difference in principle between a fragmentary personality and a complex. Complexes are splinter psyches. But moreover, in addition to being possessed by complexes or alters, it seems we can also be possessed by archetypes. It seems archetypes are not merely lifeless templates of behaviour until we give them life, but rather they're dynamic entities that can spring us. Jung said, "We know archetypes can break with a shattering force into an individual human life. It is a psychological fact that an archetype can seize hold of the ego and even compel it to act as it, the archetype, wills. And also, for an archetype has a life of its own, that life is proper and peculiar to the archetype, shows its autonomy by the fact that it can swallow one's own life. It is so strong that one can be swallowed up into it and be nothing but that archetype. Of course, one does not know it." So like complexes and alters, archetypes also have an autonomous life of their own. They're real living entities dwelling in the depths of our mind. Respectively, it seems the otherwise external spirit world exists within our psyche. The otherwise spirits are archetypes in the collective unconscious, which, as Jung acknowledges, can burst out, blinding and confusing us. Or we could invite these archetypes into our conscious mind by going into a trance. We could channel archetypes for knowledge. It's highlighted that whilst in his professional publications Jung referred to spirits as autonomous complexes, subpersonalities, splinter psyches, and so on, many believe this is a facade, as Jung always believed in the reality of the other world. He knew that spirits are real, but we're not allowed to say that in the modern age. He further stated at the end of his life, "There was a daemon in me. It empowered me. I can never stop at anything once attained. A creative person has little power over his own life. He is not free. He is drawn and captive by his daemon." So that's curious. Okay, that's that chapter finished. So I'll finish here and we can get on to chapter 6.